Coming up on Brevard Watch, the Space Coast economy hits full employment. We ask leaders from business, education, and politics who they think deserves the credit. A jury convicts a longtime Brevard politician of corruption. What are the lessons for our cities and schools? And is this Central Florida or San Francisco? Satellite Beach shows the love for sustainability, solar power, and preparing for sea level rise. This is Brevard Watch, the news experience focused exclusively on Florida's Space Coast. I'm Matt Reed. Thank you to Community Credit Union for making Brevard Watch possible. I promise you'll learn a lot from our guests today. School Board member Tina Deskovich represents the South Beaches and large parts of Melbourne, Palm Bay, Malabar, and Grant Valcaria. This year she made suicide prevention a priority, and she took a pointed position on sales tax spending on school buildings. We'll ask her about those. Also with us is Catherine Redloff, Executive Director of Business Voice of Florida's Space Coast. Business Voice is a political committee that advocates for policies that help business. It also endorses candidates it describes as collaborative leaders. Catherine and Tina, thanks for joining us here in the BPS TV studio. I want to talk first about a column that Florida Today business editor Wayne Price wrote about the ingredients for Brevard County's economic rebound. He points out first that we are at what I guess economists would consider to be full employment, maybe about 3% compared to,
wonderful.
11% back after the shuttle and the housing markets went down. But there's no pure scientific way to measure what was the most important thing that led to that, because a lot of things did. But he gave his take, including economic development efforts, the hiring by major new tech and aerospace companies, and I was intrigued that he included the, quote, local education product as part of that scene. What do you make of that? Catherine, let's start with you.
I agree. I think Brevard is so blessed right now. We are in a bit of a boom town. And when I think back to what the magic ingredient was, it is hard to put your finger on just one, because we have an economy that depends on both federal, state, and local policies. Having the space program and a very active military base, we are dependent on what happens at the federal level. But what really stood apart for me was that when President Obama was here, in 2009, 2010, and announced the shutdown of the shuttle, the way the community came together and said, we don't want this to be like the end of the Apollo. And it was massive cooperation on the part of local elected officials, on behalf of the local business community, as well as our state leaders and our federal leaders, that all got on the same page and said, we have to come together and be prepared for this. And it started what I think is probably the real critical ingredient there, that was cooperation. Nobody was fighting over it. It was a very competitive time because of the Great Recession. And any place would have loved to have had the future of space rocket launches and commercial space flight, because unlike the shuttle, they can launch from anywhere. So Virginia, Texas, even Colorado, California, they would have loved to offer, brand new build-out sites to a lot of these major aerospace companies. And we had to convince them that coming and updating our aging launch pads was actually going to be more cost-effective for them, because of the wonderful workforce and the talent that we have already in place here on the Space Coast. So because the business community, our local leaders, and certainly we're able to market the awesome workforce and education system that we have here, we were able to retain a lot of those big businesses. And it wasn't like the Apollo. That was a devastating time for Brevard County when even gas stations couldn't stay open. There were so many people unemployed. And not only did we dodge a bullet after the shuttle shut down, but look at us. We've come back even stronger than we were before, and it's just wonderful. I'm so glad. I think it's a shame to see people question who should get credit or point fingers at blame, or was that really necessary, because it all played a role, and it was that working together that's when our community succeeds the most. And I hope elected officials will continue to work that way and put the whole community forward so that we can see continued growth like we have.
Tina, what do you make of that?
Well, as the school board member, I'm going to go ahead and say that it's Brevard Public Schools that is the reason why we're doing so well. in all seriousness, people won't move to a community if the school system is not strong. And we recently have gone from a B district back up to an A district, which is remarkable. And we're second in the state for certifications in technical certificates. We just excel in so many areas, and I think that supports people wanting to move here and the growth, and businesses being willing to come here. If their employees aren't willing to move here, like Northrop Grumman and their massive growth, I've heard complaints within the community that they're bringing people, maybe not hiring from within. Well, they're bringing people, and those people need houses, and those people need to shop at the grocery store, and they need to get gas, and they're going to go out to dinner, and their friends and family are going to come and stay in hotels. And so they're going to come if the education system is strong, if it's a great place to live, if the government services are acceptable, if the roads are there and the infrastructure is there. And so we've done a good job as a community to make all that accessible. But I'm going to go ahead and still give credit to BPS.
But we can't expect engineers to move to a community and have subpar schools. We're not recruiting your average workforce. We are generally recruiting very highly educated people to move to this community and support our very high-tech industries that we have here in Brevard. And so they have a higher expectation for what the school system will be. And we've delivered.
Yeah, Northrop Grumman, I think, is hiring 4,000 or hiring within 4,000 employees. And they said the average salary is around $100,000. Those are well-educated people that want their children to receive an excellent education.
It's hard to believe that number at first, but then you look at some of the salaries that engineering students are being offered right out of college, and it's pretty impressive.
They have a lot of openings. They're having a hard time filling some of their positions. So we have our work cut out for us to get the students ready.
What's the next step, do you think? I mean, you are out talking to the public all the time. So are you, Catherine. I have found a slight difference today from what I heard maybe 3 or 4 years ago about what helps grow the economy. 3 or 4 years ago, all you heard about was incentives, economic development, trying to recruit companies to relocate here. Today, it's so much about workforce. And now we are constantly questioned, at least when I go out and talk, about what are you doing to train students in aviation and aerospace? First off, what are you hearing, Tina? And secondly, what do you make of the school district's efforts to match up that skill training to what people are asking for?
Recently, the school board has directed Dr. Blackburn and staff to do a complete evaluation of all of our CTE programs. And for that same purpose, we have many programs, second in the state, but are they meeting the needs of our community? And so over the next few months, we're going to find out. We're going to see, are these in areas that are our community needs that they want to hire from? And so we'll know more soon.
What do you make of it, Catherine?
So Business Voice is a member of the Florida Chamber of Commerce, and I have really enjoyed being a part of their larger perspective on the state of Florida, because the Chamber does a great deal of polling, and through that they're able to look at larger statistics. And the prediction right now is that Florida is going to continue to grow. Yes, people are moving. It's not just retirees. Florida, I think right now is the number one. It was just released, place that people are moving to in the entire country. So we're going to continue to grow. And with that, the business community, statewide down to our local level, we are very focused on what that means for that upcoming education workforce to fill. 'Cause everything from the contractors to help build and maintain homes and infrastructure and roadways, but to staff these high-tech jobs. We need to have a plan in place and make sure that our school systems and our pipelines are there, analyzing. It's wonderful to hear the community is doing that, because the business community is very well aware that we can't continue to grow if we don't have the people. We can't just keep importing staff. At some point we need to make sure that the children that are being born and raised in Florida have the skills that it takes so that they can stay here and be a part of our very high-tech workforce.
I want to shift gears and talk about public integrity a little bit, and get your perspectives from your different backgrounds and what you do. There was a major news story recently about former clerk of courts Mitch Needleman. After a 4-year investigation and prosecution, was convicted of bribery, public corruption, bid tampering, and official misconduct. And there are a couple of co-defendants that still have to go to trial. It's probably the biggest corruption conviction that we've had in Brevard County in a long time. We've made some efforts to toughen the laws recently. What is your takeaway from all this in terms of the importance of public integrity and what it means, say, for business?
Yeah, it's so important because right now I think the public faith in public institutions is very low. You know, when you see congressional approval ratings, you know, at all-time low, there's certainly this anti-government, get out of my pocket mentality you feel from a lot of people. So it is critical now that our leaders have extremely high integrity and that they are acting in the best interest of the community. From my perspective as the head of Business Voice, one of the things that we set out as our mission is we take very seriously the candidate interviews. And I can tell you in 2016, we spent well over 40, 50 hours interviewing every candidate that was running for a county seat or a state legislature. And that's a lot. And most voters will never have that opportunity. They may get, some mail. They may have the opportunity to see a forum or two. But we had our business leaders ask pretty pointed questions, not just about policy, but also personally. And so our being able to take where we came down on who was a good candidate, who really is going to be looking out for the community, and take that to the public, that was really a privilege in my mind of something that we were able to do because people don't know where to turn for good information about candidates. And that vetting process before someone becomes an elected official is something that I feel our organization has a good role to play in the community to help voters understand.
I won't ask you to name names, but at any point did you or your people that were doing the interviews go, I don't have a good feeling about this person from an integrity standpoint, and let's just not look there?
Absolutely. And by all means, I think more people running for office is a good thing. I would not want to discourage people from running for office, but it does not take much to qualify to run for office. You pay a couple $100, you collect a few signatures, and you can file to run. And when we consider that the school board has almost $1 billion budget, I think it's over $700,000, $800,000, we certainly have interviewed people that it's like, I don't know that I would trust you with that money,
right,
with the critical issues facing our children, with the employee issues. There's, again, how many employees does, BPS have? So for sure, I think more than a few interviews, we walked out and I said, this is a big office you're running for. I don't know that you're ready for that.
Tina, you are one of 5 people that really hold the checkbook for an organization with 9,000 employees, 74,000 students, I think at last count. What do you do as a school board member when somebody comes to you with a big deal or something that you need to, that they're asking you to sign off on or to approve? I mean, how do you stand watch over the money and public integrity in your role?
You say somebody comes to you with a big deal, and I just want to clarify that no one has ever come to me ever, which I often wondered once I was elected, were people going to come and say, would you behind the scenes do this, or would you be willing? I wondered if those kind of things would happen, and no one has ever approached me and asked me to do anything unethical or shady at this point, and I've been doing it for a year. So
that's good to hear.
That speaks well of our community, I think. But we approve all purchases over $50,000 that aren't in one specific category. And so they come before us, and they are just in the agenda. And sometimes they're hundreds of pages in a contract. And so it takes time. It takes time to dig through it and read it and analyze it. I use experts in the community because I'm not an expert in every industry. And we get everything. We get IT contracts. We get building contracts, putting in outlets, anything. I don't have experience in every single area. So I've built kind of a strong network within the community, and I will send the documents on and say, will you help me review this? Will you look through it? And people have come back and said, this doesn't look quite right. Or, I have never seen that charge so much. And I can go back to staff and we can discuss. And many times things are pulled before we vote on them if we question them. Do I think anything inappropriate's been done? But no, hundreds of pages of contracts, sometimes things get through. And so it's important to look at it all and dig deep. And so far, so good.
And I know the school district has been in the process of trying to untangle a former software purchase that, although it was investigated and there wasn't any criminal wrongdoing found, it was certainly there were a lot of questions about how the decision-making went down with that. Have things changed as far as you know in terms of how those contracts or proposals are vetted before they come to the school board?
Yeah, one of the biggest changes was to hire an in-house counsel. One of the things that I learned shortly after I was elected is that not everything was going through our attorney. We were receiving contracts that were coming out of staff, being proposed sometimes by a third party, that were never getting vetted through an attorney. That's a huge problem because we all know the EDR contract never went through our attorney at the time. And we actually, our software system that presents us the agenda to look at we even added a little box that says our attorney, when she sees it, she approves it to say she's looked at it. So I don't now have to pull and each time call her and say, have you seen this contract? So I know it has her stamp of approval, and that's a huge step to me to know that an attorney's eyes have been on it. I think we're all hyper vigilant too because of that issue. At least I know I am. I want to make extra super sure, right, that every contract is valid and legitimate.
So it's a big job. It's important, just as you said, Catherine, that the candidates who come to you seeking endorsements and help winning races at the school board level and probably other local races are probably politically motivated when they first get in, but then they come into all these major, grown-up responsibilities. Yeah. Let's go back a little bit. Talk to me a little bit about what is Business Voice and why are you doing this in the first place?
Sure. So Business Voice started off as part of the Melbourne Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Committee. And they formed a PAC, which is a political action committee, so that they could not only conduct endorsements, but, yes, they can contribute then to candidates. And so for a number of years, they would go through in the spring, a series of interviews, make endorsements, and then hand out a few $500 checks and a press release. Well, after a few years, the board didn't feel like they were really making an impact in the community, and that either the endorsement wasn't being as effective as they hope it would, or that just the community didn't know about it. So in 2015, they spun off from the Melbourne Chamber to take on a more regional focus. So now we are just a standalone organization. I have just over 40 members, which are all businesses or individuals that contribute to this. And really, our objective is to communicate more with the public. We do still conduct the interviews, and we still did write a few $500 checks to those candidates we endorsed, but the bulk of the money that we raised was spent communicating with the public about who these quality candidates are, because we can't have higher expectations for our public officials if we don't have higher expectations for our candidates. And as I mentioned before, getting involved before somebody actually becomes elected is a critical step in that political process, and often voters don't know who to turn to. So if we can take on the task, so to speak, of interviewing and getting to know these candidates and who's going to think of the community at large, one of the lines that I like to say is the district you represent is very small, but the impact of your office is going to affect people outside of your district, and it's going to affect our economy at large. So the business community is very invested, not only in what's happening at the school board level, but what's happening at the port. We're very concerned about, all of our constitutional officers, our county commissioners, and our state legislatures. They can't just look at who elected them. We need to be thinking about the region as a whole. So that's the role of Business Voice. And then in the off-year election, like this year, 2017, we focused on candidate recruitment and training. And that's not to say we were going out trying to pull people and say you should run for office, but I do believe that there's three types of candidates: those that want to run for office from the time they were in junior high and got a sport coat. I believe there are those who have a lot of time on their hands, or maybe politics is their passion and they're very into it, so they gravitate because they like to talk about it, so they think they should run. And then you have those who are natural leaders within a community who are doing good, whether it's in business or the private sector or nonprofit, that we could just really use their leadership in the public sector. And I think sometimes those people need encouragement to run. So that's what we tried to do, and we offered a candidate training program where we had 14 candidates come and participate, nonpartisan. I have 6 of those candidates will be on the ballot in 2017 or 2018, and the rest are, really considering public service. And it was a wonderful opportunity to hopefully educate them on what it really takes to run, because unfortunately sometimes the idea of running for office is what deters good people from actually taking that step into public service. So if we can make that a little bit more manageable, a little bit less scary, then that's a great use of our time and resources.
When we come back, conservative Satellite Beach becomes one of the most environmentally progressive cities in Central Florida.
Take the BPS CCU High School Mascot debit card anywhere, anyplace. Show your school spirit every time you use your card. Get your favorite BPS CCU High School Mascot debit card today by visiting any CCU branch. Learn more at ccuflorida.org/spirit.
This is Brevard Watch. I'm Matt Reed. My thanks to Community Credit Union for making today's program possible. We'll have more with our guests Tina Deskovich and Catherine Rudloff in just a moment. But first, check out what's happening in Satellite Beach. Today's one-on-one interview is with City Manager Courtney Barker. Courtney, thanks for joining us on Brevard Watch. Let's talk about a couple of the things that Satellite Beach is doing it's a little different from what some other cities have going on right now. One of them is you're planning for sea level rise. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, our city has some very progressive thinkers on our planning advisory board. So we have started sea level rise planning. We started back in 2009. Now we are at the point where we're incorporating sea level rise projections in our infrastructure planning. And we're also looking at changing our land development regulations to allow private property owners to deal with the effects of climate change.
What would that look like?
That would look like allowing people in the storm surge areas to stilt their buildings. It would allow people, we're actually talking now about increasing coastal construction setbacks.
Meaning how far out onto the dune somebody could build if they do build on the beach. Okay.
Yeah, so right now, we're probably in line with most other cities, but we have some pretty high eroding areas in our community. We've already had a pool fall into the dunes, and now we have a house that's kind of teetering on the edge of the dunes. And so we're looking at certain areas of the coast that we might increase those setbacks a little bit.
Well, speaking of the beach, there's been long in coming a beach renourishment or widening project for the mid-reach of the beach there, including Satellite Beach, Indian Harbor Beach. What's the timeline for that?
That looks like it's going to start construction next year, and it looks like it's going to be fully funded on the federal and the state level. I think with our city, we're looking forward to that project. Our council is very supportive of it. But on the other hand, we're looking at trying to design like coastal construction setbacks that would encourage a healthy dune system so we don't have to keep doing that. And we don't have to keep renourishing our beaches, that we can build a healthy dune system that can withstand the storms.
Let's talk about schools a little bit. You've got 3 elementary schools or 2 elementary schools, a middle school and a high school, all in Satellite Beach. They seem to be centers of community. How would you size up the relationship of the city with the schools in Satellite Beach today versus how they might have been before? Or
I think it's gotten really, really much more communicative in the recent years. We've partnered quite a bit in the past 4 years with the schools. We created agreements to share facilities so we don't have to keep charging each other. We also recognize the challenge of PTOs raising money for playgrounds, so we helped the Surfside Elementary get their playground financially, and now we're also recognizing Satellite High School parents having the challenge of raising money for the track. We're helping with that as well. And what the good thing about that is it gives our residents the ability to use those facilities as well. So it's kind of saving both of us money in the long run. We share maintenance, we share facilities, and we don't have to build 2 and maintain 2. So
the idea being that when school's not in session or the schools aren't using those facilities, they become community recreation places to go run laps or maybe to play on a playground.
Yep.
Let's talk about a development that has gotten a lot of discussion in the city. It's at the corner of DeSoto Parkway and A1A, the site of a one-time kind of run-down fish restaurant, got torn down. The city bought the property to prevent it from becoming a gas station at one point, but it's been sitting empty for a long time, and now someone has stepped forward with a proposal. What is it?
We are looking at selling the property to a developer who's going to develop a mixed-use project with a small restaurant, a 25-unit boutique hotel, and townhomes. So this project came out of the fact that we require certain commercial properties to maintain a commercial use, so we don't lose our commercial uses to residential over time, which happens a lot in beachside communities. But it's hard right now because of the market. But they came up with this idea and they think it's very viable. The best part about this project is the whole project will be solar powered and will basically be built to green building standards and completely sustainable. And that really falls in line with a lot of the things that our city council is going for right now.
What's the reaction been to that in the city?
We have a lot of people that are very supportive of it. But we have some people that are, they don't want change. They don't want to see any change. They're used to seeing a vacant lot there. It's been vacant for 12 years now, at least. And I think the city bought it back in 2007. So it's been vacant for a while.
So they want to just leave it
Right.
a lot with the grass growing on it.
And we also, part of the project is we maintain some public parking use. So we received 17 public parking spaces as part of that project because we do use that property for overflow of events at Pelican Beach Park. And so a lot of people are just used to parking there, you're used to using it, and to see it go is upsetting to them. On the other hand, we have some people who are upset about the project because we sold it for a lesser value with the uses that we're putting on there. If we did sell it to a gas station, we'd probably get more money for it, but we bought it to keep a gas station out of there. So there's some people that are upset about the price that we're selling it for. But most of the community is very supportive of it. They want to see it developed and they want to see a pretty building, and the building is absolutely beautiful. It's being designed by Larry Maxwell, who's a great architect, and it's a beautiful building.
So real plans, at least it's going through the process with the city in a real way.
Yeah, and since we own the property, we have a lot of control over the timing of development and things like that. And so we're negotiating a developer's agreement right now. And so they can't not develop the property without giving the property back to us. So that's the kind of agreement we're striking right now.
Courtney Parker, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We're back with Tina Deskovich, Brevard County School Board member representing the South Beaches and parts of Melbourne and Palm Bay, and Catherine Redloff, Executive Director of Business Voice of Florida's Space Coast. Let's visit some recent headlines from Brevard County. One's kind of fun, but it might have some serious undertones. Sheriff Wayne Ivey is the master of communication, it appears, with social media. He has done some interesting things on Facebook, including the Wheel of Fugitive that's gotten a lot of attention. He's been talked about on late night talk shows, but he really feels like engaging the public in law enforcement is the right way to go. I just want to get your take on that. What do you think about his use of social media and communication in his role?
Sure. I'll be honest, this has two different sides to it as far as I'm concerned. From the one side, social media is the new communication platform. It's how many people, certainly the younger generations, get a lot of their information. So I see this as him using a new modern tool to communicate and engage the public. In the old days, they used to put posters up at the post office, when everybody had to go visit the post office. So I don't think this is any different a tool than maybe what law enforcement has always done to try to engage the public, to try to help them catch a few bad guys, to go after a few fugitives. And if it works, more power to them. I do think the flip side is I think the article pointed out, it's over a $500,000 budget and the number of staff that he has supporting this. And that politically, through that perspective, he might have to answer for that, come re-election time, because in the rest of our county, budgets are being very closely analyzed, and the county commission and the school board are having to account for every single penny that they're spending and make some really tough choices about where our public tax dollars are going. So I think seeing such a exorbitant amount spent on social media and communication, he might get some blowback from that, and that's something he'll have to answer for, come election time. But I certainly get it. Again, I look at everything through a political perspective, and he's one of the few people that has to run county-wide in our very large county. So I can understand why he'd like to get his name out there, and I'm certain that everything that he's doing is helping boost his name ID. But again, whether or not people and voters appreciate the use of tax dollars being spent towards that, it's something he'll have to answer for.
Well, I'd just like to point out again that this program is sponsored entirely by Community Credit Union, and all promotion is from that sponsorship as well. So no new tax dollars
No
were
new
spent
tax
on
dollars.
this program, but it is an experiment. I mean, there's a lot of media and communication that's transforming out there. Sheriff Ivey is clearly taking advantage of that.
Mm-hmm.
Tina, from your perspective as a school board member, what do you make either of Sheriff Ivey's use of the communication tools or maybe what BPS does?
You know, my background is communications.
Yeah.
My degree's in communications, public relations. So it's to the forefront for me that we communicate. And I think as public officials and as a school district that's using public funds, it's extremely important for us to communicate to the public, and that costs money. And I think Sheriff Ivey understands that. Is he using it in the most effective manner? I have no idea. I don't analyze his budget. I work with our budget. And so I think that's his decision. We've elected him. If crime was rising and we were seeing, the department fall apart and we felt like there were real issues within our community as far as our sheriff's office was going, I think it would be time for us to criticize. But things seem to be going really well. I think the article said the crime rate was going down. So I say give him the leeway as the leader that we've elected to do what he needs to do to get the communication out.
There seems to be some, I wouldn't say magic, but the superintendent of Brevard Public Schools, Desmond Blackburn, is the king of the selfie. Everywhere he goes, he's tweeting, he's Facebooking, he's using social media to connect with people. They know what he's doing. There seems to be some transparency and trust with that. And maybe when there are hard decisions to make, they'll be more likely to at least listen or know how to connect and sympathize with that.
I think in social media today, people are so quick to just be nasty and,
Yes.
and judge harshly and to throw things out there. And with our elected leaders, sometimes even worse, they'll take you down in an instant. So if we can use social media on the other end to let people to get to know us a little bit, let them see that we're human beings, we're moms, we're dads, we have families, we're trying our hardest to make the best decisions for our community. It helps. I think it helps build the relationships. It's very important. We can be doing some great things up here, and he can be doing some great things in the sheriff's office. If we don't communicate them, people will never know that the great things are happening. And unfortunately, in today's world, they automatically assume that bad things are happening and that we're not managing things correctly. At least that's my perception of what I hear from people. And so it's important that we get the news out to people.
Well, and it's the only coverage you're going to get from modern media is the crisis du jour or the snappy headlines a lot of times. And so public officials, can use social media for the time between crisis du jours to communicate the good that they're doing. I think we all wish that there were that, sunny side news where you could go and get all the wonderful things happening all the time. But a lot of times, whatever scandal issue, that takes top headlines. So social media is a way to directly communicate with not just your voters, but just the community at large, of some of the good things that are happening. So there's a lot to be said for using that tool effectively.
Let's move on to the next headline. I wouldn't say this is a happy or sad, although it began as a sad story, but suicide prevention has become a pretty big thing in Brevard Public Schools. It's an initiative that was undertaken in the past year. I know it was a budget priority. Tina, explain that.
Preparing to run for this office and then getting elected in November, I had many things on my plate that I wanted to accomplish and many priorities, and suicide prevention was not one of them. Mental health was not on my radar whatsoever. I didn't even think about it as being part of this job. Within a few days of being sworn in, getting my laptop, and getting the updates of what's going on in our district, I was shocked, to say the least. The numbers coming in daily and weekly of children that are Baker Acted, sent to circles of care because they've been found a threat to themselves. The number of students suffering from severe anxiety, severe depression that we actually put through our system of identifying as a potential suicide risk. They're called suicide risk inquiries. Those numbers, I was astonished. And within a couple weeks of being elected, I was notified of the first student since I was elected to have taken his own life. Since then, we've had 9 students take their own life. So very quickly, my priorities as a board member started moving down a bit, and suicide prevention, mental health awareness, depression, anxiety help took the forefront. And so I brought that forward when we sat down on our budget priorities list as something I felt like we needed to do. I proposed a small amount, relative to our budget, $16,000, to put in at least an assembly in each school to help communicate directly with students. And immediately the board was like, yes, absolutely. We were able to rank our priorities and what we wanted to accomplish, and that rose to number 1 for everyone. So I'm grateful for that. We have a lot of work yet to do. Not to say we're not doing some amazing things already. The north end of the county has a program in place that the district has written a grant for to try to get spread into all of our schools. So that's a good thing. We have also in our budget priorities, we hired many social workers now to put within our schools to help connect families and parents that are struggling with the right places in the community to get the help and support that they need. Our job is to educate students, and I've heard the arguments for that we shouldn't be doing anything else, but it's certainly hard for a child to learn if they are suffering from depression and if they have anxiety. And our numbers this year are, since I've been elected in the past year, are 3 times higher than they've ever been in our history of recording these things. The trends in our county and in our state and nationally are all growing. It's getting to epidemic proportions, and so it's something that we have to address and face.
You're so right about that social and emotional piece of it. I was in a meeting just recently with 10 principals from schools that they are really struggling to turn those schools around. Test scores need to come up, the grades need to come up, and one of the very first things that they talked about when asked, what do you need to help make that happen, was, boy, we got to find some way to cope with that small number of students who are just, for whatever reason, their behavior is really deviant in some fashion. They're either hyperactive or they're aggressive towards students and staff so that the other students can learn and you can lift up that school in some fashion. I don't know how you do it. I wish them the very best of luck, but they did have good plans. So
that, you say that's a small number, but I argue that there's a much larger number of students sitting there that can't focus or concentrate because they're experiencing severe anxiety. I've been researching and reading so much. District staff, and they've luckily kind of taken me in and letting me be part of a lot that we're doing because I'm so passionate about it now. We've had discussions with UCLA. They're working on a global system for helping children with anxiety and depression because it's such a problem globally. And so we've had discussions with them of what we can do, and we're trying to find the right solution. Unfortunately, no one has the solution, but research has shown that children that are young, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, that are starting to experience severe anxiety will almost absolutely suffer from severe depression in high school. And so I feel like there's something that we need to be doing with the lower level. We haven't figured out what it is yet. Many of those students are acting out, and that's what you're seeing in their behavior problems.
Wow, so maybe ultimately that might be one of the things that contributes to suicide prevention, is helping those students who might follow that arc
in the younger years
get the kind of stability
Absolutely.
that they need early on. Let's go on to the next headline. Catherine, this one's just for you. There was a story in Florida today about how some of the city races and other local elections that are technically they're nonpartisan, you're starting to see more party activity in those races. I think the headline there is that you've got these Bernie backers who have taken over the Democratic Party, and they're trying to get somebody elected somewhere. What do you make of that? Is it such a wrong thing?
Well, I don't think they're breaking any laws. Election law is pretty clear, and it often gets challenged. But when volunteers are phone banking and, promoting candidates, to their supporters, this is who you should vote for, as long as there's no coordination with the candidate, then I don't think they're really breaking any laws. Now, going to the spirit of why we have nonpartisan races versus partisan races, I would argue that particularly in Brevard County, because we've always been so traditionally Republican, that's twofold. That's why the local Democrat activists need to try to recruit and get people elected at the municipality level, because they can't get people to run for these higher partisan offices because they don't have a bench, so to speak. They don't have enough, locally elected Democrats that would then want to run for higher office. So I understand why they want to support this. but it might backfire for them a little bit because, when, our very Republican-leaning community starts to research and look into candidates, being backed by the local DEC for a nonpartisan race, might, bounce back and hurt them. One thing that candidates find very quickly is that just like churches, you can't pick your followers. And so sometimes those who are speaking out on your behalf or those who choose to line up behind you, that might not always help further your cause. But I, for one, think that the more people who get involved in our elections, the more contested elections we have, rather than just an incumbent running unopposed or a primary on one side of the aisle determining a race, I don't think that's good for democracy because we certainly want to see, as many people in the community have their voices be heard. So they just need to be careful, in how they approach it. And I think it's really on the candidates themselves to stand on their own 2 feet. And if the local Democrats have an activist base that's, going to be turning out volunteers this year, and that's wonderful. They haven't had that for a long time in Brevard County. So, we'll see where it leads.
What do you make of it, Tina?
I had to run as a nonpartisan candidate, so I have my own opinions about what I think about nonpartisan races, and I understand the spirit of them. Education should be nonpartisan, judges should be nonpartisan, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because we are human beings and we have ideas and we have opinions, and the public deserves to know, a lot about us. They don't need every last little nook and cranny detail. They'll ask, but judges can't even say what political party they belong to. And I have a problem with that. I want to know their history. I want to know what they believe. And if they've joined a political party, they believe some pretty principles that align in one direction or the other. Right. And I think that's important information to get out for the public to see. So do I have a problem with the Democrat Party out campaigning for nonpartisan races? Absolutely not. It's their duty to support the candidate that they think is going to represent them and their values and what they stand for. So
I always found it a little bit interesting that some people would show up as, say, Democrats or Republicans, and the first office they run for is a whopper.
Yeah.
It's going to be the Congress or the state legislature, and they haven't ever served a day on a city council or even a zoning board or something. And is that a problem, or is that?
Oh, it absolutely is. I think that the best higher elected officials are those who have a really good understanding of what's happening locally at home. Because I don't think anybody, Republican or Democrat, would disagree that the government that's closest to home has the biggest impact on you. So really understanding if you want to serve at higher office, whether you've served on, just boards and commissions, advisory boards and commissions, or you've served in local elected office, you'll absolutely be a better state legislator or congressional or senator one day. That's not to say there's not exceptions. We certainly have governors that go right from the private sector,
sure.
Or senators and that sort of thing. But in my opinion, and I think for what would be in the best interest of Brevard, having more diverse city councils and communities so that we can have more contested other offices is not a bad thing. But like I said, right now the Democrats, they've not had a bench to pull from, and there are many races, in recent Brevard history where there's just not even a Democrat, on the other side of the ticket. So we'll see. Things might be changing, but Brevard is, a red county, and we see more and more this self-segregating of Americans where we, are becoming more polarized. So I'm very interested to see what will happen in this election cycle if we become a little more purple going forward, because of their efforts, because they're, hitting the ground so much. We'll see how it pays off.
Do you think there's some generational politics that happen, that things are evolving a little bit based on just the ages of the candidates who are running now versus maybe 5 to 10 years ago?
Well, so I'll say that for certain we see in looking at how people are registering to vote, younger people, and I say younger, those under 40, are much less likely to pick R or D, and that we see the ranks of NPAs in the state of Florida growing. I'll again cite the Florida Chamber's polling, and then where they, were tracking it. They think the Republican Party could be a second-tier party behind NPAs and the Democratic Party in the near future. Now, you wouldn't know it when you look at our state legislature and when you look at, who holds our statewide elected office, but that's a whole nother topic on how people get elected and where we've come from. But there definitely is a generational shift away from the two parties. One of the proposed amendments that the Constitutional Review Committee is looking at would be to change I'll call it the way a primary gets closed. Right now, if there is a write-in candidate automatically that files to run for office, automatically that closes a primary. So then, just Republicans run and Democrats run. And what the Constitutional Review Committee is looking at is saying a write-in is not enough to close a primary, that it actually has to be a filed Democrat or a filed Republican to close a primary. And the intent of that is that we've seen it here in Brevard, where you'll have a number of people file on one side of the aisle.
And that's the race.
And that's the race. And then a write-in files, and that closes the primary. And so then you have just a few thousand people selecting who's going to represent, 15, 20,000 voters. And then magically that write-in candidate either, never campaigns or does anything, or sometimes they even withdraw, before the general election. So it's trying to avoid that situation, because the more voters that can actually vote and participate in selecting their elected officials, I think ultimately is a good idea. That's a good thing. So we'll see if the Constitutional Review Committee brings that forward to the people of Florida to be a change they want to see in the future.
When we come back, enough headlines. It's time for our guests to break some new news. Don't miss it.
Take the BPS CCU High School Mascot Debit Card anywhere, anyplace. Show your school spirit every time you use your card. Get your favorite BPS CCU High School Mascot Debit Card today by visiting any CCU branch. Learn more at ccuflorida.org/spirit.
Tina, one of the ways that Brevard Public Schools made news in the last 6 months or so was deciding to accelerate the school security piece of sales tax spending. Voters approved a half-cent sales tax back in, I believe, 2014 that would help renew, repair schools, also prepare for and spend on school security that was lacking, as well as some education and technology needs that were happening at the schools. When you go out and talk to the public, as you do as a school board member, what kind of feedback are you getting about the sales surtax? Do they trust us? Are they skeptical? Do they want to know more?
So before I tell you what I think, what I'm hearing from the public, I want to say that I know that we're doing a great job with the sales tax money. We follow it very closely. We have the oversight committee that doesn't let anything get by them. And we have lists from each school that we put together before the tax even passed it and said this is what's going to be done. And we are, as a district, going down each of those lists as the money comes in and checking things off one for one. And if anything, we're doing such a good job doing exactly what we said we're going to do. I think we're doing it too well, because sometimes things are getting, I think the language said it had to be like for like on everything. So if air conditioner was not doing a great job in the size of the building, we are replacing with the same size sometimes because we said we were going to do like for like, and maybe it needs a bigger. So I want to say that because public perception from what I'm hearing is we're not spending the money how we said we were going to spend it. And it's very frustrating because I know that we're spending it exactly how we said we were going to spend it, to a fault sometimes, so that we don't convey that we're doing anything different than we were. So I think we need to do a much better job communicating, like we were talking about Sheriff Ivey earlier. We need to do a better job communicating how well we're doing, following what we said we were going to do with that sales tax.
When you say we're spending it the way we told voters we were going to spend it, what does that mean? Percentage, dollar amounts, where it's supposed to go?
There seems to be an assumption within our community that we were only going to spend it on fixing the buildings only. And that actually, I think, turned out to be about 80% of what we committed to. There's a percentage in there for security upgrades, and there was a percentage in there for IT, information technology. Small percentages, I think both of those together equaled maybe 17%. I don't know the exact numbers. And so people are saying that we said 100% was just going to be pipes and air conditionings and roofs, but we said when it was passed that those things were going to also be included. And so somehow in our communication plan, we need to come out with people and show them what the language was, what we said we were going to do, and exactly what we've spent it on.
The school security upgrades, you were able to vote to accelerate having security fencing, single point of entry, technology by spring break of 2018, whereas it would have taken longer before. Why do that acceleration?
Well, did you know I voted against?
Oh, you did.
I did. I
you voted
against
it.
that.
Okay.
So I can explain a little if you want,
Okay.
even though I voted against the acceleration.
What was the issue?
I had a few issues. The reason why, one of the things I campaigned on was increasing security in our district. I wanted SROs in all of our, and I still do want SROs, school resource officers in each one of our elementary schools. But I had a few issues of why I voted no that night, and one was the contract. Remember earlier in the discussion we talked about these lengthy contracts. I was not comfortable with the way it was written. I was not comfortable with how they projected some of the pricing. I didn't feel like it was clear and transparent, and it bothered me, and things were kind of changing down to the last minute with that. That concerned me. From the time that was released to us to the time we had a vote on it, we also switched out our, or I should say Sheriff Ivey switched out our director of security. And the previous director had some concerns with the way things were laid out. The new director loved it, but I hadn't had a chance to consult with the old head of security. Everything was a little on the edge for me, and so I did not feel comfortable voting for it. It was millions of dollars. The last issue there was that it changed the percentage of the amount we said, this is the one area, of what we were going to spend on security. And it was like 1% difference. I think we agreed to 7%, and this was almost 8%. It wasn't a huge difference. I had no trouble with that. I still could have supported it. And it also changed the length of time. We were going to spend the 7% over the length of the 6 years, and now we were going to shorten that. Again, not a huge problem, but public perception could have been a problem there. And me being the PR communication person, I didn't want to lose public trust over us rushing to get these things built before they were needed.
Well, I think that speaks to these just being hard decisions to make. These are large-scale spending projects in addition to wanting to take care of kids' safety. It's not always going to be unanimous, and those are the kinds of things that you have to think about when weighing a contract that's coming forward to you.
Yeah, it was an interesting evening. It was my first voting different than my board. Usually if there's controversy between us, it'll get pulled before the board meeting until we can agree and get it settled on how we all kind of like it. So, it was interesting to vote no, and the board was very responsive, and there was no discontent, no hard feelings. Right. Everybody understood. I explained why I had to vote that way, and I think that speaks a lot for our board and our working function.
Well, there are city councils and county commissioners who vote 3-2, 1-4 all the time on issues, and they don't think twice about it. So,
but I've also seen some political sportsmanship, for
True.
lack of a better word, go on with those votes and name calling, and then you go out in the press the next day, and I don't see that within our school board.
Yeah, I didn't detect that at all in watching that at all. Catherine, from a business and political point of view, you probably hear all the time from people who are rather skeptical of local government. How would you size up public trust at this point in Brevard Public Schools, or in, even if it's the surtax issue specifically?
Well, I think, so 2 points that. From my political perspective, this specific issue was very tricky for the school board, because I think the ramifications, if they hadn't accelerated the increased security, that could play politically of, why this school before that school, and how are you picking the timeline?
Right.
And you would have gotten some heat, if the decisions had been made to spend the money that way. But as you said, the decision now to change it and maybe accelerate what percentage or whatever, you're going to hear from people, I'm positive she will, who are saying that wasn't supposed to be the priority, my kid's air conditioner or whatever. You're going to hear from people on how that was spent. I think Brevard is a very tough place to be an elected official, because we do have very vocal citizens who are, watchdogs, and they want to know that our public tax dollars are being spent efficiently. Now, that said, I think that the level of competency that we have is outstanding. And I think that Brevard has operated on shoestring budgets and cutting for a number of years, and our staff continues to maintain just wonderful quality at all levels of our county and local governments. And so when a sales tax gets passed, when it gets proposed, this was shot down the first time. It might have even been twice. I don't recall if it was once or twice. But voters said no. And so the business community partnered with, each other, and got together and said, we need a campaign to help educate the community on how important this money is needed. They cannot pull this money out of thin air in the budget as it's getting, that we needed to do something. And so there was a very large campaign to help educate the public, and that is why now they're going to be held accountable. There were listening sessions, there was the PowerPoint presentations, all over the district saying that this is why we need the money, this is where it's going to go to. And so when you have to do that level of public education, then there's certainly going to be that level of public scrutiny on the other side now that you've gotten those tax dollars and they want to know that they're being spent efficiently. But I have the utmost confidence, particularly because of the sales tax and how the money was presented to be spent. To, like we said, we have those projects. We know where it's going to, and I'm very confident that Tina and the other school board members will help continue to educate the public that those dollars are being spent as they promised. The lagoon sales tax is another wonderful example. Again, the business community, we were happy to get behind and support the Save Our Lagoon sales tax. I don't think, because of the short timeline, I would say the education sales tax, that had a number of years of communicating and talking with the public about why we needed it. That lagoon, it was a fish kill in March, April. Bam, that got presented. We campaigned for it and people were voting on it in November. So I don't think the education of what exactly it was going towards was as detailed to the public. So there's a lot of questions now. How are you spending that money? Where is the money coming in? Is it being spent efficiently? And county government's going to have to be very clear in how they communicate to make sure that everyone understands they are using those tax dollars as we said they would.
Seemed like it was that kind of feedback that led to measures such as you got to have a plan. You got to have independent oversight, and it's got to expire at a certain point so that we can take stock and decide again whether we want to reapprove this or decide that we're good. Was that your take, Tina?
Yeah, absolutely. The first proposal was a 10-year plan, and the public was not buying it. They did not want the sales tax for 10 years. They wanted the plans. They wanted it laid out, and we've done so, and we've stuck to it, and we've followed it. Does the lagoon have an oversight committee?
It does.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we bring in right now, the sales tax for us is bringing in $40 million to our capital fund to fix buildings. So if they're doing a half cent too, that would be another $40 million towards the lagoon.
And has it exceeded what they projected?
Yeah, originally they expected it to be $33 million per year. That was the projections, and we've been averaging about $40 million per year.
That was one of the things, if I recall correctly, was one of the pro arguments for being able to accelerate the school security was this deviates from the plan in terms of percentages, but in terms of money in the bank to be able to do it, it's not going to take cash away from other projects.
It's complicated to communicate that to the public.
You're
I
right.
felt. And so, yeah, I think
they trust you or they don't when it comes down to
But
voting.
again, in Brevard, we have a very educated constituency, and they pay attention to these sorts of things. And I'm sure Tina can attest from going door to door or, town halls, more people than you would, I think, find in other areas do pay attention to this level of where our tax dollars being spent.
I find people here, it's Red County, but I find people here to be very charitable,
Absolutely.
but distrustful of bureaucracy. Is that a fair way to
Absolutely.
size
that's
things
the
up?
American way.
Is it?
Right?
Good.
Yeah, totally.
We have a higher than average level of nonprofits in this community. I think we have something like over 2,000 nonprofits in Brevard. And so per capita in the state of Florida, we lead as one of the most generous communities in terms of supporting the nonprofits. So I would fully agree with you. People are very generous. I think when the case was made of this is going towards, really, needs, they were more than happy to vote for it. It ended up passing, I believe, with over 60% of the vote. So
I was struck when I worked in previous life, I worked at Florida Today and was a professional media person for a long time doing journalism. I was struck when we did our market data research on Brevard County, when we asked people, how do you spend your leisure time? Because we wanted to design sections and products or beats to serve them with information they wanted on it. Volunteerism, number one thing.
That's awesome.
wonderful.
And people were
That's
always
great.
looking for ways to volunteer. I thought that was really fascinating at all age levels as well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
We have a great community, really. I love it here.
I'm going to give you both a chance to sort of make your own news here with the news program. And so what I always like to ask our guests is, what's next for you? What's break news for us here? Got any projects working on? Something happening next, Catherine?
Well, we just finished. So my focus in 2017 was putting on a candidate training program. We did that in October. So now my head is down. We're doing some research of what our members would like to see us do in the coming year, but we are gearing up to, again, interview all candidates for county level races and state legislature. We don't get involved in federal races or the municipalities. We're not quite that big of an organization that we can handle all of that, but the county and the state. So we will be spending January through June getting to know as many of all of the candidates, I hope, and then spending a great deal of our time and resources in 2018 letting the public know exactly who's running for office. And again, I can only state that the business community wants Brevard to be a great place to live, work, and do business. And in order to do that, we need to have elected officials that really understand the impact of their office on all of our daily lives. And so that's our goal, and I'm really, I can't believe it's 2018 already. It seems like 2016 just ended, but we are gearing up. We've already got county commission races heating up. We've got an open state legislature race. It's going to be a very busy cycle here in Brevard again.
Tina, what's next?
Next kind of in the process of, and where I'm focusing for the next year is 10% of our students approximately 10% are gifted learners. They are our highest achievers. They have great potential. Research shows that their needs are not being met, and believe it or not, Brevard Public Schools does not have a gifted program for these children. Individual schools may be meeting their needs with different classrooms and programs. We have no consistent program through the district. So one of my priorities last year was to start fighting for that. The board approved a couple weeks ago to hire a coordinator at the district level to begin the gifted program. And we will start in the spring screening all second graders. For every single second grader in Brevard County will be screened to see if they qualify for the gifted program. And so this next year is going to be me fighting and pushing for those learners. We're Brevard County. We send people to the moon. We send people hopefully to Mars one day. We send rockets into space, and our children deserve a gifted program that meets their needs.
I'm honestly surprised to hear that we don't have something on a countywide level with that many students. As you mentioned earlier, Catherine, we've got engineers and people bringing some really smart kids to Brevard County, and to not have something much bigger in place to identify them is
it
really
always
pretty
gets
surprising.
cut to the bottom because they're the smart kids, and so they just get left. And research shows that by high school, some of these kids even drop out and lose their way because they've not been challenged, their needs have not been met. Now they're going to homeschool and different options because their needs are not being met. So I think it's our responsibility to do what we need to.
Thanks for breaking some news.
Most welcome.
Well, that's our program. My thanks to Community Credit Union for making today's educational program possible, including our promotion and outreach. Thank you also to our guests, School Board Member Tina Deskovich and Business Voice Executive Director Catherine Rudloff. Our producer, editor, and drone photographer is Mike Francisco. I'm Matt Reed. See you next time on Brevard Watch.